Welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show, brought to you by the Institute of Clinical Excellence. My name is Dr. Jeff Musgrave, Doctor of Physical Therapy, proudly serving in the older adult division. So today I'm excited to talk to you about a really interesting research article I came across. This was just published this month. And what it is it is a study comparing the results of aerobic training versus strength training in older adults, healthy older adults, and looking at the change in hypertension. The study is actually titled Differential Effects of the Type of Physical Exercise on Blood Pressure in Independent Older Adults. Hypertension, as we well know, is a number one contributor to heart disease. There are obviously lots of lifestyle modifications focusing on losing excess adiposity, reducing smoking. But from a aerobic or a exercise standpoint, what's going to help us lower someone's hypertension the most? Is it aerobic training or is it strength training? So this was a controlled trial that was completed from 2018 to 2021. And it was healthy older adults with a long-term follow-up. This was a 4-year study, which is pretty cool. We don't always get to see studies with this long-term follow-up. Group 1 was aerobic training. Group 2 was strength training. What they did is they were doing 2 60-minute sessions twice a week for 4 years, okay? So both groups were able to reduce their systolic and their diastolic blood pressure. The strength training group had superior long-term effects. So the aerobic training group, their improvements plateaued after about 2 years. So if we're thinking about long-term programs for older adults, getting them into wellness, if we're trying to get someone hooked on fitness, it just drives home the fact that strength training may be more beneficial, especially for the cardiovascular system, and reducing hypertension than we previously thought. So some things I do want to mention, some considerations here on the type of aerobic training. This was moderate intensity. So they were 60-minute sessions. They both had a warm-up, cool-down period. The chunk of the work was about 40 to 45 minutes. So the aerobic training group was primarily focused on treadmill training, walking training at a moderate intensity. The strength training group was doing a lot of different things. So there was actually a protocol that was being followed that has been previously studied, and it was called the Strenhold program, Strenold, and I'll have the DOI for you there if you want to look this one up. But it was body weight and resistance bands and working at 70% intensity for the strength portion. But when you dig into the strength portion, we've got coordination and aerobic games for 10 minutes. We've got strength training exercises with body weight and resistance, not very well described there. And Pilates, yoga, balance training were all thrown into that 40-minute period. So it would really be a stretch to say this was, when we think about 45 minutes of a strength training, it wasn't just classic functional training like deadlifts and squats and overhead press and those type of things. And it was resistance band. So on one hand, knowing that this was primarily body weight and resistance band, it's applicable and would be practical for a lot of older adults to do long-term. However, when we think about strength training, if you've been in the ICE community for very long, we're thinking about barbells, dumbbells, kettlebells, and pushing a pretty high intensity. We can get effort out of resistance band. We can gain strength with resistance bands. It's also a lot less threatening, which are all great positives here. But I just want you to wrap your head around, this is not high intensity aerobic training versus high intensity barbell or resistance training. It was resistance training at 70% effort with viable rest periods between strength sets. It was body weight plus resistance. So all those things are good. Those are in line with resistance training. But just to be clear, this is not high intensity interval training. It was moderate intensity, 40-minute sessions primarily on the treadmill versus this like mixed modal strength training approach. Pilates is strength training. Yoga does have strength training, and bands and body weight do provide strength training, but it may not be what we're classically thinking of. So the good news is Both were important. Both helped our clients get better. What they found is the strength training group, because they continued to get improvements after the 2-year mark, after the aerobic training group had plateaued. There may be greater benefits to doing strength training as a primary countermeasure to hypertension, which affects a lot of cardiovascular disease. Some caveats here, some things to think about. I would love to see a study that compared high intensity interval training with a long-term follow-up, which is a big ask, right? This is really incredible to have a 4-year study with outcomes. So I'd love to see a high intensity interval training. It is very well studied in the literature now that high intensity interval training is safe and effective, not only in healthy populations, but also in those that have cardiac disease, people that have had strokes, people that have heart failure. It's really becoming the gold standard for cardiac rehab. And I also have a systematic review that I'm going to be dropping in the caption for you if you want to check that out. And then also, high intensity interval training as a method for strength training for older adults has also already been validated. So I love that this looked at aerobic versus strength training. But if we're looking at PT 2.0, what we should be providing here, we can do high intensity interval training as a strength training measure. There was another great systematic review just building in the evidence, looking at high intensity interval training on muscle strength to fight sarcopenia in older adults. So although it is aerobic versus strength training, it's maybe not the gold standard yet. And this is a big ask, right? This study had a 4-year follow-up, but I would love to see high intensity interval training stacked up against high intensity resistance training and look at the follow-ups. Because we know with an and not or approach, which we love here in the ICE community, we can do something like a REMOM, where we're using functional based strength training to also drive cardiovascular adaptation. We can control the rest. We can ramp up the intensity of a functional movement and get more bang for our buck. Just to be clear, that is not what this study looked at. But in my dream world, we'd have a long-term study that really compared aerobic training to strength training. The way we do it now as a gold standard, but we don't have that yet. So based on this, what should you consider? I would say consider strength training for your cardiac patients. They need strength training to fight sarcopenia, to avoid 1-rep max living, to build reserve, to have healthy bones, to have healthy joints. And this may just be another benefit of resistance training that we should consider that for a long-term program. We also know, based at least on this study, it is suggesting that resistance training and functional movements, bodyweight movements, may be a beneficial long-term program to help to improve hypertension, to help fight against some of these cardiac conditions, which I think makes it very worth the time. So let's get some resistance training in there for our cardiac patients. I mean, classically, myself and a lot of others are probably biased. If the primary concern is cardiac in nature, then we're going to be going after high intensity interval training and aerobic training. But maybe we consider strength training or strength training with limited rest to push that intensity for cardiac benefits as well. So keep the resistance training in the mix. I'd love to see more follow-up studies in this area. I'll be watching the research for that. But a blended approach may be a viable option. Using a REMOM, resistance training, compress the work into a smaller period of time, get the cardio effects with the resistance training may be a really good idea. I would also say that in general, small changes in blood pressure are worth it. Small changes may have big downstream effects, whether someone is just on the cusp of being pre-hypertensive and getting them back into normal range, or they already have hypertension and you move them into a pre-hypertensive state. Those small changes may change their life. So don't forgive that. Small changes may have big implications. Team, I hope you found this interesting. I'll have the DOIs for all the listed articles in here so you can dive into these things. If any of this stuff is new or you want to take a closer look, I'll have the DOI for this article, the strength hold program, high intensity interval training and cardiac rehab, as well as a high intensity interval training for prevention of sarcopenia in older adults. Two really well done systematic reviews there as kind of more of our gold standard approach for older adults. If you're interested in more content like this, we've got our level 1 and level 2 older adult courses kicking off in March 15th and then March 16th. That's level 1 and then level 2. And if you want to catch us out on the road, what this looks like practically to do with older adults at different functional levels, I'm going to be just outside of New Orleans. We've got space for you if you want to hop into that one, February 23rd. We'll be in Sparks, Glencoe, Maryland, on the 15th of March, and then just outside of Chicago, March 22nd. If none of those work for you, we've got lots of great offerings across this entire year. We'd love to see you in one of our courses if we can help. If you want some help leveling up your care for older adults. Team, have a wonderful Wednesday. We will see you next time. I would love to hear your experience working with cardiac patients and using strength training. Have a great day.